April 10th, 1912 was the day when the world's largest and most luxurious ship RMS Titanic set out for its maiden voyage. This journey of Titanic was from Southampton in England to New York City. There were about 2,200 people on board, out of which about 900 were Indians. These passengers include crew members, common citizens, big businessmen, and actors. There was a lot of excitement among the passengers, public, and media for this first journey of Titanic. Titanic became so famous since its construction without traveling at all. It had happened that a crowd of people had gathered near the seaport to see its vastness and beauty. More than 100,000 people had gathered there to see the start of the first journey of Titanic. People had learned as much about Titanic as they could. I had heard and read in the newspapers that it was even more beautiful and grand than it looked from the front. This ship is 269 meters long, 28 meters wide, and about 53 meters high. Its height was more than a 10-floor building. It was as beautiful from outside as Titanic. In the appearance, it was much more luxurious from inside than it appeared. It was so luxurious from inside that even the best five-star hotels paled in comparison to it. It had stained glass windows and netwood door frames. Apart from this, there were two large grand heated staircases. This ship is filled with many facilities like a swimming pool, a gym, for big restaurants, a library, Turkish bath, electric bath, 2 barber shops, and many more. Titanic was special in terms of luxury, but its safety features made it even more valuable. It was made in such a way that it could never sink. A double-bottom hull was used in it, which made it very strong and safe. Actually, during the journey, the lower part of the ship constantly remains in the sea water. There is a danger of it hitting any internal rock or any other object. So in the case of Titanic, if the ship passes through such a situation and its lower part gets impacted, then due to its double-bottom hull, its second hull would be used to keep it safe. Titanic's second biggest safety feature was enough for this was because it was divided into 16 watertight compartments, which meant that if due to a collision a hole was created in one compartment and it got filled with water, even then that water could not enter any other compartment. This safety feature was also available in all the other compartments. Titanic was designed in such a way that even if 4 of its 16 compartments were damaged and filled with water, Titanic would not sink. This was the first ship of the White Star Line Company. The biggest, most beautiful, and strongest Titanic was built in the Holland and Valve shipyard in Belfast City, Northern Ireland. 3,000 workers worked continuously for 3 years to build it. It cost $7.5 million, which is equivalent to $400 million today. White Star Line was so confident about its design and strength that they named it Unsinkable Ship, that is a ship that can never sink. But the company that made Titanic, thousands of people aboard Titanic, and the crowd of lakhs of people standing to see the first journey of Titanic had no idea that this was going to be the first and last journey of the world's biggest, most beautiful, and strongest ship. Who knew at that time that the ship will remain in the pages of history as a tragedy that people will not be able to forget even after many years? The Titanic was a new breed of luxury liner. It was the largest ship, yet the unsinkable pride of the White Star Line left Southampton among her passengers and many of the wealthy and influential. The Titanic sank into the depths of the North Atlantic after it struck an iceberg. More than 1,500 lost their lives. Hundreds of passengers and crew witnessed the tragedy and lived to tell a story how the ship sank. You escaped the propellers and right at water. The rudder was right at sea, the bottom, and then glided away. Last Titanic, April 2nd, after a brief sea trials in 1912. The Titanic departed Southampton, England, for New York on the afternoon of April 10, 1912, under the command of 62-year-old Captain Edward John Smith, a member of the White Star Line. There were strict orders from the company that Titanic had to reach New York within 7 days by the morning of April 17th. In this way, the company wanted to set an example with Titanic that Titanic is not only the biggest and most beautiful ship in the world, but it is also the fastest ship in terms of speed. In this case also, it is ahead of the rest of the ships of the world. Captain Smith was one of the most trusted captains of White Star Line who had worked for this company for 32 years of his life. So following the orders of the company, he kept the ship in good condition for 23 to 24 hours. The ship began to run at a rough pace of knots. At about 6:30 p.m. on April 10th, the Titanic made its first stop at Chabat, France, where 274 passengers boarded for the New York City flight. After leaving Chabat, the Titanic arrived the next day. On April 11th at 11:30 a.m., it stops at Queenstown, Ireland, from where 123 more people are taken on board. After this, Titanic had to stop directly in New York, so the ship starts moving in the direction of New York at its full speed. Inside Titanic, there was hustle-bustle everywhere. There was an atmosphere of happiness among the people, and everyone was enjoying the first journey of Titanic to the fullest. People had paid a good amount for the journey, according to that time, where the price of Titanic's third-class ticket was 7 rupees, the price of £1, and second-class ticket was £13, while a first-class ticket was £30, which is equivalent to about ₹1,00,000 today. Apart from this, a first-class parlor suite was also available for the ultra-rich people, which had 2 large sofas. The bedroom had 2 walk-in wards, a private bathroom, and a large sitting room, along with many special facilities. The ticket for this parlor suite was £870, the value of which is more than Indian rupee crores as per today's rate. On the other hand, while the passengers were enjoying their voyage, the crew members aboard the ship were busy with their work, most of whom were engaged in serving the wealthy and first-class passengers. Due to the deadline of reaching New York by the morning of April 17th, Captain Smith ordered the Titanic to reach the shore. The ship was running at full speed. The speed of the ship was undoubtedly high, but the captain and his team were taking very close care of every aspect. This was the reason why the ship was taken through the southern track instead of the northern track in the North Atlantic Ocean. This was done because the weather in the area of the maiden track is very bad from January to August, and there are huge icebergs present there, so there is a risk of collision. Keeping this in mind, the longer route of the sodden route was chosen instead of the direct route of the ocean. At that time, there was no special technology to detect icebergs or any storm danger while being present in the ship, due to which the ship had to be alerted about any danger in front of it. The next portion had a crow's nest at a height which was used as a lookout point. It was also known by the name of Titanic. There were always 1 or 2 people posted at this place who would keep a watch on the sea with the help of a telescope and warn the captain about any iceberg or storm in the path of the ship. At that time, this was the case in Titanic. The job was taken over by Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, but the problem with them was that they had to keep an eye on the dangers ahead without a telescope. In fact, David Blair, an officer of Titanic, was shifted to another ship at this time. Due to which, when David Blair left Titanic, he mistakenly took the key of his locker along with him, which also contained the telescope of Titanic. No one had thought, even in the worst of dreams, that a small mistake made by David this could be the reason for the sinking of Titanic. Due to the lack of much technology at that time, all the ships had to move in coordination with each other. Messages were transferred between ships through wireless radio, in which the ship in front would tell the ship behind it about the way. Senior Officer Jack Phillips on the Titanic operated the wireless radio system and warned the crew of all the dangers lurking in the water. While maintaining contact with other ships, Titan was about halfway through its journey across the ocean when it received its first warning of an iceberg on April 12, 1912, from a French ocean liner, La Touraine. Jack Phillips conveys this warning to Captain Smith, but no special attention is paid to this warning, and the speed of the ship is not reduced. Titanic continues moving at its speed. There was a festive atmosphere inside it, and the passengers were lost in their own world. The crew was busy with their work, and Captain Smith was hopeful of reaching New York on time. All was well aboard the ship, as more than 150 firemen were hard at work below the ship, and a constant supply of fire was being supplied by them. Coal was being poured into the furnace in abundance. Everything was normal, and Titanic had completed 4 days of its first journey without any hindrance. But as soon as the day of April 14th began, Titanic started facing a total of 7 problems, one after the other. Iceberg warnings are received. These warnings warned of the danger of icebergs ahead. It was normal to have icebergs in that part of the ocean, but so many warnings at once worried the wireless operator Jack Phillips. The reason for his worry was the speed of the ship. This was Titanic's first voyage, and so passing through an iceberg area at such a high speed was a risky task. Without wasting a single moment, Phillips informed Captain Smith about all the warnings one by one during Titanic's first voyage. But Joseph Bruce, the chairman of White Star Line, the company that built Titanic, was also present. It is believed that when the captain told Bruce about the iceberg warnings and asked him to reduce the speed of the ship, Bruce flatly refused to do so. Bruce did not want the ship's speed to be reduced because of iceberg warnings, and thus the ship would reach New York later than its scheduled time. However, considering so many iceberg warnings, Captain Smith ordered Titanic to set sail at 5:05 p.m. on April 14th. The route was definitely diverted a little towards the south, but the speed was not reduced at all. The Titanic, moving at a high speed, had now entered the darkness of the night. Unfortunately, the moon had not risen that night, due to which there was darkness all around in the sea. In such low visibility, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee was not able to see anything far away clearly without binoculars. This was not the only problem for him, but the bone-chilling cold had made his troubles even worse. Both of them were unable to see clearly due to the biting cold and cold winds. Water was flowing from the eyes of the SS California, and it was becoming difficult for them to see anything clearly in the dark sea. At 10:05 p.m. on the night of April 14th, Titanic receives the ninth and final warning via wireless. This warning was sent to Titanic at that time by SS California. The information was given by the wireless operator Sarl Evans from the ship. Both the ships were only a few kilometers away at that time, due to which when Jack Phillips of Titanic received the wireless, a very loud sound echoed in his ears. Phillips gave repeated warnings. Already fed up of meeting the accused and no action being taken against them, and now this warning from SS California made him even more angry. Phillips abused Evans, cut the connection, and started sending messages to the passengers again. Phillips sent messages to the passengers through the California ship. The information received was also not shared with the bridge crew, in which they were told that due to the presence of huge snow mountains, the California ship would not travel further, and they stayed there for the night. Phillips had no idea that if this was told to the captain, then what would happen? Had the warning been given, and if Titanic had also stopped at that place at night like the California ship, then perhaps Titanic would not have sunk, and in history Titanic would have been mentioned not for its destruction but for its success. About 35 minutes after the last warning, at 11 p.m. At 30:30, as the Titanic was rapidly moving through the water in pitch darkness, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, who were in the crow's nest, were keeping a close watch on all the obstacles coming in front of the ship in the dim light, open space, and strong cold winds. It is very difficult for them to see distant objects without a telescope, but then 9 minutes later at 11:39 p.m., Frederick saw a huge ice rock in front of the ship which was about 400 feet long and 100 feet high. This rock was the size of a football ground. On seeing this, Frederick without any delay rang the bell 3 times and immediately telephoned the 6th officer James Paul Moody and informed him that there was a very large iceberg right in front of the ship. Before Frederick could say anything further, Paul Moody told the whole story to the 1st officer. He informed William Murdoch, after which the entire crew sprung into action. On William's order, the engines were put into reverse at full speed to stop the ship, and the ship was rapidly turned to the left side. But now the speed was very high. It was too late. The speed of the ship was so high that it could not be stopped even after starting the reverse engine in such a short time. Apart from this, the ship was so big that it was not possible to turn it completely in a short distance in this situation. Titanic's strengths have become its biggest weaknesses after a lot of efforts by the crew. Titanic was turned to the left to a great extent, protecting it from the iceberg, but still at 11:04 p.m., the right part of the front side of Titanic collided with the ice rock. This collision was very severe. The force of the collision was so high that it shook everyone present on the ship. In such a situation, the double-bottom hull of Titanic was of no use because the collision did not happen from the front, but from the side, and only a single layer was applied on the side. The designer of Titanic, when Thomas Andrews surveyed the damage, he found that 6 compartments of the ship were damaged and were rapidly filling with water. Hearing this, Captain Smith was shocked because the ship could float only until 4 compartments were filled. 6 compartments filling with water meant that the Titanic, which had been considered unsinkable, was now about to sink. Thomas Andrews told the captain that they had only 1 to 2 hours to escape. The ship will sink underwater after colliding with the iceberg. The people who were sleeping suddenly wake up. It had been 20 minutes since the collision. Everyone got frightened seeing the water filling up rapidly in Titanic. There was a fear in everyone about the unsinkable Titanic that Titanic might sink in some at any moment. The ship can sink in the sea. In such a situation, at 12 o'clock in the night, Captain Smith orders radio operator Jack Phillips to send a distress signal so that any ship nearby can come to rescue them. By now, 6 compartments of the ship were completely filled with water. The water was now filling up, and water began to overflow onto the deck and enter other spaces. During this time, the crew was constantly trying to remove water from the compartment using pumps, but within just 45 minutes of the collision, Titanic had lost 13,500 long tons of water. Tons of water had entered the ship, while all the boost and bilge pumps on Titanic had the capacity to remove only 1,700 long tons of water per hour. Knowing the fact that the water was filling up so fast inside the ship, it became impossible to pump it out. Even though the crew on one hand, Phillips was trying his best to pump out the water, and on the other hand, lifeboats were being launched into the sea to save the passengers. It was unfortunate that there were only 20 lifeboats in the big and expensive ship Titanic, out of which some lifeboats had a capacity of 65 people and some lifeboats had a capacity of only 40 people. In this way, only about 1,200 people were saved through these 20 lifeboats. It could have happened while there were more than 2,200 people on the ship. At 12:02 in the night, after continuous efforts by Jack Phillips, Titanic's distress signal was received by the ship. The crew on the ship was about to get free from their duty at that time. And if the distress signal had been delayed by a few more minutes, then Carpathia Shipping might not have been able to hear the call of the sinking Titanic. As soon as Carpathia came to know about the condition of Titanic, it immediately turned its direction towards Titanic. The diverted carpet did set out to help the Titanic, but the question was whether it could reach there in time, because by then the carpet was 107 kilometers away from the Titanic, and it would take a long time to cover this distance. Even if the ship was running at its full speed, it would have taken more than 3 hours, but Titanic did not have that much time left. So the crew of Titanic was still trying continuously for urgent help, where Phillips was still trying continuously. Distress signals were being sent, and some crew members were launching distress rockets into the sky so that nearby ships could come to their aid. But unfortunately, Titanic could not contact any other ship for help during the night. At 12:45, the first lifeboat was launched into the sea, which had a capacity of 65 people, but due to the chaos and confusion, only 27 people could be seated in it. As per the protocol, children and women were given preference first, and making them sit every few minutes, but lifeboats were launched one after another. But due to negligence, the first few boats were launched without being fully filled. As the water began to fill the front of the Titanic, they began to move further away. The ship was tilting towards the sea and was sinking in the water. When the tilt of the ship started increasing too much, there was chaos all around. Everybody started trying to make a place in the lifeboat to save their lives. The panic of some people was so much that he tried to save his life by jumping into a boat coming down from the ship. During this time, special priority was being given to saving the first-class passengers, and the third-class passengers were facing the most difficulty. At around 2 o'clock in the night, when the last lifeboat was lowered from the ship, there were still more than 1,500 people left on the ship. There was not a single lifeboat left on the ship, and despite repeatedly sending distress signals and firing rockets in the sky, Titanic could not find help. For no ship had reached near it. In such a situation on the ship, an atmosphere of fear had developed among the more than 1,500 people present there. There was chaos all around, and sounds of screaming were coming from everywhere. Those who knew how to swim were jumping into the sea, but ultimately they could not swim. How long could these people survive? Because at this time the sea was also being cruel. The seawater was as cold as -2 degrees Celsius, and in such cold water, a person could survive for a maximum of 30 minutes. So some people did such a thing. He did not try to fail and quietly embraced his loved ones while staying in the ship and got ready to accept death. Water was filling up in Titanic at a very fast speed, and it started sinking in the sea rapidly. The front part of Titanic, the ship, had sunk completely underwater while its rear portion was raised high in the air above the water surface. Now the ship could have completely sunk into the sea at any moment. In such a last moment, Captain Smith had a very emotional conversation with his crew. He said that he is proud of the bravery of each of his crew members. Everyone performed their duty by fulfilling his dream. He saved hundreds of lives, and now the crew members should also try to save their own lives. After saying these last words, Captain Smith disappeared from everybody's sight somewhere inside the ship. He was not seen by anyone after that. Someone told some said that the captain was pulled into the sea by the current of water, while some said that he committed suicide. At 2:1 in the night, Jack Phillips sends the last distress signal. Till now he was in constant contact with the only ship coming for help, Carpathia, but the next minute, at 2:1, due to the excessive water filling in the Titanic, a short circuit occurs and the ship's electricity is cut off. Phillips' connection with the car was lost, and now there is only darkness all around. In such darkness, the Atlantic Ocean was echoing with the screams of people. While the 700 people sitting in the lifeboat were trying to control themselves, the people who jumped into the sea were struggling between life and death in the icy water. Apart from them, thousands of people on the ship were also struggling to save themselves. People have left themselves to fate, and they are waiting for the last moments of their life. People started counting their breaths. This heart-wrenching scene became more terrifying in a few seconds. In fact, the rear part of Titanic was completely standing in the air, due to which the pressure increased so much that Titanic broke into two parts from the middle, due to which later at 2:2 in the night, RMS Titanic suddenly sinks in the Atlantic Ocean forever. The Titanic, which was built in 3 years, did not take even 3 hours to sink after hitting an iceberg.